Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Christina and on behalf of myosh, I am so excited to have you with us today for the final session in our Psychosocial Safety for Leaders series, proudly presented by FEFO Consulting and Dr. Liz King. Now, today's focus is all about leadership and more importantly, how leaders can foster psychological safety while navigating the pressures and challenges of the modern workplace. This session, entitled Enabling Leadership, Building Capability and Influencing Psychosocial Health, will provide you with practical tools and strategies to lead with confidence, care and clarity. So what you guys can expect to take away today is how your leadership behaviours shape workplace culture, performance and engagement, how to handle those tough conversations with empathy and impact, and how to create psychologically safe, high-performing workplaces using simple and effective leadership techniques. Now, today we're joined by two fabulous presenters, Mark Wright from FEFO Consulting and Dr. Liz King, a leading voice in organisational psychology, who is here to share her insights on leadership behaviours and workplace wellbeing. Now, as always, we encourage you to get involved, so please share your thoughts, drop your questions in the chat box, raise your hand if you have a question. We'd love to throw to you throughout and love it if you could take part in the conversation as we go. Now, just before we get going, I wanted to thank each and every one of you who have taken part over the 3 sessions. We've had such an incredible and overwhelming response and some really amazing positive feedback on everything that has been discussed. So on behalf of us all, I just want to say thank you so much. Now, let's finish this series strong. Mark, Liz, over to you guys.
Great, thank you, Christina, and look, thank you to myosh too. I mean, they're really our leaders in this space in terms of supporting what is a really great way to share information. So today I am filling in for Terry. So Terry Swanton is one of our team and was called away to Darwin with some urgent client matters. So I have jumped in at the last minute. I'm also confident that things will go to plan, given that we've got Liz with us. So thank you, Dr. Liz, for joining us. And it's fair to say that, Liz, you are very well qualified in this space. And yeah, really look forward to sharing some information with the audience today.
Thanks, Mark. Will I give a brief intro? Oh, no, we'll go into setting the scene. Yeah.
No, I do think it's worth doing an intro, Liz. I mean, you do have a huge amount of experience here, so it's probably worth letting the listeners know a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you. And thank you for this lovely slide. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this incredibly important topic, taking time to discuss one of the urgent issues in our world right now. Mark's kindly created a slide here that has some of my background listed. I like to study, so I've got a few degrees, and I'm extremely passionate about a company that I started in 2000 with a mission to bring a really practical sense of kindness and wisdom into our leadership work. I speak to you today with a strong sense of the situation that we're facing together, because I chair the Workplace Committee in the World Federation of Mental Health. We see the data, and as you know, there's escalating issues in mental well-being at work. We have developed together a competency matrix that's an application of some work I did in my PhD in the context of safety leadership, so that allows me to speak to you with that sense of interest in your world. I've run a Masters of Mental Health, which looks at solutions that are very broad, and my PhD was about leadership in uncertainty, so I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to be with you today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Liz. So for those that may have missed the previous 2 webinars, I'll just do a really quick recap. So fundamentally, the foundation around the 3 webinars is around a psychosocial maturity model. And some of the key messages from webinar 1 was to really focus on building trust and empathetic leaders as a primary focus, and think about diagnosing before jumping into solution mode and coming up with any treatment or controls. Ironically, that take-home message around building effective leaders is a recurring theme today in the final webinar as well. To complement that, we also spoke about various methods to assess risk and come up with some effective controls, particularly at an organisational level. In webinar 2, we spoke a little bit more around support, balancing both capacity and capability as it relates to job demands and job resources, and the impact that may have on the workforce, either positive or negative. We spoke a little bit more around assurance, lines of defence, and how you might verify that to ensure that the psychosocial controls you put in place are not only implemented but remain effective. And then lastly, we spoke a little bit more around the role of an officer, their duties, their legal duties, and how they might go about exercising due diligence. And then lastly, we spoke a lot around how do you actually build an effective psychosocial strategy. So it's great to have some fundamental risk management strategies in place, but ultimately, whatever intervention you have in place needs to be tied into some sort of effective thought out strategy. And then finally today, we'll be talking a little bit more about leadership. So we'll jump straight into it. Liz, you did make mention of some work that you've done in your PhD. And for those that are on the call, it's probably worth mentioning that we are partnering with Liz on some work around leadership. And although this focus today is on psychosocial factors and managing psychosocial risk, it's fair to say that having effective leadership is fundamental to helping organisations navigate a strong, psychologically safe organisation. So, Liz, I'll allow you to explain the model, if that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for listening to this piece of work, which we are really excited to bring to you because it's the product of a decade of analysis of different sort of disciplines and how we look to support people who are navigating, working and leading in uncertain and risky times. And we won't spend a lot of time on this framework right now because what we want to share is it's a really deep development framework which links to most of the models that you will have heard about in the context of safety leadership. And it presents to us some ideas that start with, firstly, we lead ourselves through an inner journey, which then creates some behaviours that help others in their journey. And there's 3 elements of that inner journey, which is an understanding of the way we use our mind, how we pay attention to things, how we make sure we're broadening our awareness, as you all know is so important in safety, and how we actually accept what's going on and focus on the reality of the situation. So this links to the assessment work of FEFO so strongly, and it helps us work with people when we're understanding what's really going on. The framework also creates a sort of sense of how to think about the world as a system so that we can create interventions that not only focus on the context but the changing conditions. That's looking at the interdependences and, very importantly, the way our sense of identity plays out in our work. So these sorts of ideas will be touched on again as we go through our presentation today. But for now, we can get started on today's topic.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. And it's probably worth just finally mentioning with respect to the competency framework around leadership, that it's underpinned by concepts not only around leadership, but some strong topics around both health and safety, in particular psychosocial health. Okay, then, Liz, we're going through 3 main topics. So the presentation will be broken up into 3 key areas. So really look forward to you leading the discussion, and I'll chime in where necessary. And at the end, there's a few offers and free resources we can provide the listeners too.
Thanks, Mark. So if we just go back to the overarching structure of this agenda, and then, but Mark's just shown you that we've got a poll up here now. We'd like you to consider the answer to this question while I just set you up for a frame for our conversation today. Importantly, the topic is critical right now because we've got a productivity crisis, especially in Australia. We've got a mental health crisis, and for most of us, we want to reduce any sort of suffering that we see in the workplace. There's a very clear relationship in both practice and research that between leadership and people's experience of psychological well-being, and it's in both directions. So leadership is incredibly important. This topic today allows us to investigate solutions to this situation. Anyone who's turned up to listen to this topic is really a hero, because the way we lead ourselves and the way we understand this situation leads to the opportunity to have dramatic positive effects on our lives, the lives of people that we work with, and our organisations. So as I speak to you about these three issues, please know that there'll be people in this room that will be more expert in safety and more expert in psychological safety than I am. And so for all of us, our role today is actually have an open mind. And if you can, engage in the chat. If you like, put your hand up and engage in conversation, because we'd love to hear from you. Engagement's encouraged because our stories allow us to connect and learn more than any sort of database, really. And we're looking for conversations as well as questions. In fact, even more so than questions. We just really like to know what's on your mind about the topic. So with that said, please if you take time to complete the poll that's just been put up, and even to offer some ideas in the chat. We'd love to know what challenges you're facing in this context.
So far, the biggest challenges from the responses is collaborating to enable high performance, closely followed by demonstrating care and concern. And the one trailing at the bottom so far is executing with excellence.
Okay. So these are very understandably shared concerns. You know, our desire to create high performance and our desire to show our care when we're actually rushing and under pressure. This seems like a very common shared experience. So let's have a look at how we might address that with the three aspects of, this is great. Yeah. So things still coming in?
No, it's closed off now. So the winner, well, I don't know if you call it a winner, but collaborating to enable high performance at 28%. 23% demonstrating care and concern, and still at the end, at the bottom, is executing with excellence.
Great. So it sounds like we're sharing this idea of how to support people to perform at their best while simultaneously showing our human side. Is that right? Mark, you had something to say?
Yeah, look, I think it's also fair to say that this is very individual, and although some of these shared experiences can be, looked at from an organisational perspective, understanding yourself and understanding how you are as a leader is a great way then to try and influence others as well. As part of the work that we've done in the past with leadership development, we often will complete what we call safety leadership self-assessments, so getting people to self-reflect. And this is just an example of, I guess, some of the data that we've seen collectively across participants completing leadership development and the feedback that they've had self-reflecting on their own leadership styles. And interestingly, care and concern is actually the best performing result based on the population that we've worked with. So not one necessarily one or right or wrong answer, but certainly a great opportunity to stop and reflect to understand how your performance is and how you can then positively influence others.
Picking up from that, I do like how there's some substantial research that suggests there's a really strong mismatch between how much a leader is concerned and caring and how much is care and concerning. And sometimes the people who are really caring are actually so focused on the task, which is ultimately to help somebody, they sometimes forget to take a breath and show their humanity with their eye contact and their physical behaviour as well. So that's something worth considering, because we don't need any sort of sense of self-blame going on. We are going to talk about three key areas. leadership, boundaries, and psychological health. Before we get there, we wanted to offer you, before we specifically look at leadership behaviours, to set the scene, we wanted to offer a few lenses that we can look through in terms of understanding what it is we're trying to create. If we want to help people perform and to be well, then what is it that they need? And we can draw inspiration from some substantial scholars. I think we can describe the 5 psychological principles that tell us what everybody needs, including ourselves, to perform well. Mark, do we have this slide? So these principles, many of you may understand or have observed, and we'd love fingers up, comments in the chat, whether you are familiar with the self-determination theory, which was published by Wright and DC, which is widely discussed in the world of psychology as the most well-known theory of motivation. So we're wanting people to feel motivated because the sense of motivation produces good outcomes and also makes people feel good. So what we want to do for ourselves and for those that we lead is we want to make sure that they feel connected, that there's a sense of autonomy, that they have an opportunity to feel competent by appropriate roles and responsibilities, that they are tuned into noticing what's going on, and that they have a sense of meaning. So if we just take these frames into the way we're looking after our own leadership and the way we're behaving to support others, then what we get is an environment where people can actually flourish. This work's been written by many people, and we are recommending to you a book with a really beautiful title about creating the world we want to live in, written by a dear friend of mine who's recently left us, Felicia Hubert, and her colleagues. And it's an outline of an application of these principles with a chapter on leadership. And it shows us, it gives us something to focus on creating for ourselves and for people. There's 3 capabilities that we need to do this. The fact is we need a clear mind, so a mind that is able to see what's really going on. Again, that's helped by the assessments. It's also helped by your reflection. We need an open heart, and with an open heart, when we're leading ourselves and others, then we naturally reduce bias. And we also need an open mind where we can see what's going on around us, and we can be aware of the systems and interdependencies we need to work with. Really keen to hear, so we'll ask you soon if you can reflect on which sort of capability you find most difficult. Because these 5 principles of sustainable wellbeing can be turned into 5 leadership principles that we can use as lenses for our behaviour. And Mark, if we just show our next slide, we're simply planting for you this idea of Bloom, and I invite you, if you'd like to pick up a pen and write the acronym Bloom down one side of the paper, and if not, just to remember these, and we can send you something outside of this session. But what we want to do to help, what we're wanting to do as leaders to create, is the fact that people feel a sense of belonging, the B. They feel interconnected with each other. We want to make sure that we're providing a learning environment, so people are learning and developing themselves. We want to make sure that we're providing the opportunity to recognise choices for everybody. The next O is we want to provide an orientation towards what's working. So the theory of leadership that produces people who are psychologically flourishing very much focuses on a solution-focused coaching model. Time and time again, we show that solution-focused coaching provides a sense of safety and performance for people. And finally, the M in Bloom is meaning. People need to know that what they're doing is important and it contributes to the greater picture. So we are creating Bloom for ourselves and people: belonging, learning, opportunity, orientation, and meaning. Let's look in detail at leadership now. In the context of health and safety, what's very clear in the research, and we'd love to know in your practice, And while we're talking, if anybody could put in the chat the capabilities that they find they're most challenged by, that would be great as well. What we're looking to do here is consider, we now know what we want to do with our leadership. How do we demonstrate that? Therefore, demonstrating the care and concern. The research is really clear. There's 3 forms of leadership that create great outcomes in this context: transformational, transformational, inclusive, and empowering. The words say it all, and they link to the competencies that we originally discussed. Basically, if we're behaving in a way that is transformational, seeing those develop towards what they want to be, inclusive, seeing everybody as the same and wanting to be happy and perform well, yeah, and empowering, so that we're making sure roles and responsibilities allow people to have a sense of mastery, then what we get is psychological well-being and performance as an outcome. So we can hang on to this idea of the way we need to lead for this as considering leadership as like a lighthouse, guiding people through difficult terrain towards a place that they really want to get to. If we can go. One key aspect of that in the context of safety is that we need to work towards this idea of the error-friendly organisation. And that means we want leaders to go first. Now, this is an image of leaders going into a hazardous situation. And in this context, the hazard is being vulnerable. What we want to do is role model vulnerability so that people feel that they can share that they've made a mistake or that they see a mistake. And study after study, Amy Edmondson is famous for this, other more recent studies have occurred in healthcare situations where when people feel safe to speak up, then the environment is error friendly, and leaders need to go first with this vulnerability. So we would love to hear from you any stories that you have about this. Do you find it hard? You do have some great
in the chat. Yeah, in the chat.
Great, thank you.
Some people have said leadership decisions, non-empathetic managers who don't believe in mental health, and a lack of EQ in leadership to navigate and demonstrate. Do you have any thoughts on those?
Yeah, Mark, I'm wondering what the data says about those topics, because they sound like, to me, shared concerns for many.
Yeah, so thanks, Liz. We do have some data, and I mean, what I like about working with yourself, Liz, is that you come with a really strong academic background, and some of these concepts, are super interesting in terms of understanding, I guess, how to apply some of these concepts. What we've got to, I guess, complement that is some data based on what industry is saying. And what industry is saying is aligned with, I guess, some of those concepts you just referred to there, Liz, that there is a strong positive correlation between leaders setting clear expectations. And the top 3 areas of with the strongest relationship around setting clear expectations as a leader is actually my job having an adverse effect on my mental health. So there's a link there, both positive or negative. There's a strong link between setting expectations and workers holding each other accountable. So setting expectations with the workforce around calling out unacceptable behaviour that might lead to stresses. And then lastly, a real link between setting clear expectations and supervising, focusing on workable solutions rather than blame. So again, really, some of those concepts you spoke about, Liz, around a solutions-focused approach in terms of coming up with options to improve as opposed to cast blame, is, I guess, reinforced by some of the data that we're seeing there as well. So a couple of key messages there is to empower your workforce to hold each other accountable and coach your supervisors around this positive solution-focused approach.
Mm. We all know this, how nice it is to be around people that are positive. So yeah, if you could just we wanted to all give you an opportunity to think about which capability you personally find most difficult to develop of the sorts of things that we've just discussed, and just pop it in the chat. We wanted to do a bomb, and we'll do that maybe a bit later, just as it comes, and we'll come back to that. So which capability do you find it hard to keep your mind clear when, you know, the demands are constantly coming in and priorities being shifted? Do you find it hard to keep an open heart when actually you're distracted by a fear around your work life? Do you find it hard to keep an open mind when people are really different to you? Do you find it easy to notice your bias or not? These are things worth considering because they're the pathway and the deep development that we need to do to lead well in these situations.
I know for myself, when it comes to that sort of thing, and similar to what some other people are writing in the chat, is being mindful of others and their viewpoints and where they're coming from when I'm under pressure and when I'm stressed. And you've got to it doesn't hit you until after the fact, where you go, oh God, I could have taken the time to understand where they were coming from or what was going on in their world before I got too stressed, sort of thing. A few people have been writing being mindful when under pressure, keeping their mind clear, having an open mind, emotional intelligence, keeping my integrity in check. And it's hard to maintain an open mind when greatly different to others when under pressure. That I feel in my soul. So yeah, it's all quite similar, isn't it?
Well, it's all. So I'm really appreciating this chat. Thank you, everybody who's contributing. I have no doubt that anyone who's watching the chat is also learning a lot. So thank you. It means a lot to get the most out of our time together. It also leads to the reason that the competency matrix we're offering in our programs underlies a sort of like deep development, because these are not easy things to do. I can see in the chat that we're talking about developing a meta awareness of the way we are thinking and the way we're feeling and how that ends up in our behavior. So required in that is essentially the elements of wisdom. We need to be able to reflect, right? And we also need to be able to develop the heart. And we need to do this in the moment. So generally what happens is we need to practice it outside of the workplace or the difficult scenario. Thank you so much. All these ideas are really helpful, and it helps us, reminds us that we're on track in an important conversation. So we know sort of where we're going. We know now the environment we want to create. We want to create an environment where people feel a sense of mastery, where they have this sense of autonomy and they feel connected. And we understand what we have to do as a leader to help that happen for ourselves, leading ourselves and for others. And what that is the belonging, the Bloom, an acronym, and also this idea that we are leading for transformation, for inclusiveness and empowerment. So what gets in the way of that? And we can see some things in the chat already. And this leads us to the next topic today, which is boundaries. Boundaries help us have a conversation around what gets in the way of being the leader that we want to be.
So as we start to move towards that next topic, Liz, we've also got a resource to share with people. So thanks for pulling this together, Liz. And these are practical tips. And Liz, I'll have you sort of maybe explain one or two of these if you like in a second. But I think it's some of these concepts that you referred to are really good. And often there is a bit of a knowing-doing gap around how you actually apply some of these skills, particularly under pressure, as Christina alluded to, having that clear mind so you can work effectively. So these are basically prompters on how to have effective conversations and assist you, particularly when you are under pressure or when you're in challenging situations.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks for bringing this up. So we wanted to leave you with this sort of like practical so what. The fact is that leadership happens in conversations. So then we go, well, how do I make sure I'm demonstrating the care that I feel? And what we do is we really check in on our language. Amy Edmondson's work is extraordinary as an example of this. And one example she gave us was that if they change the language in the healthcare systems from we're going to do an investigation to we're going to do a study, the fear drops. So what happens is when people feel fearful at work, they've got the fight and flight reaction in their body, and that means that we can't think well. We're focusing on the problem, not the solution. So what we want to do is make sure that our words do not enhance the sense of fear that many people have at work, right? So the conversation techniques that we'll send you later are simply all about how to take our attitude of inclusiveness and empowerment and care to our people in a practical way. Sorry, and
while
to say
you were
that,
choking on your words there, one of the amazing examples we've had prior, good, have some water, is in another coaching and leadership webinar that we've held, is some really amazing ways to frame a conversation. Is, say somebody's late 3 days a week, but 2 days a week they're on time. Instead of saying, gosh, you've been late 3 days a week, as a leader, you could approach them by saying, what went well the 2 days? Like, what really went well those 2 days that you arrived on time and you were ready and you were happy to go? And it was just that tiny little shift that framed the question in a positive light, as opposed to, why did you do that? You should have to do this. That won't work.
Yeah, so that is, I think, the most profoundly useful leadership development approach we can take. It's built on something called a solution focus approach, which has been published by a number of people, but it's a great book to find. And there's just a series of tools that we can use to help us stay connected to focusing on what's working, helping people from building more about doing what works rather than looking at fixing up the problems. We have to identify the problems, but then we need quickly to move on. So we strongly recommend a coaching leadership approach to complement anything we're doing in this area. All right. So let's move on to...
We'll move on. But for those who have wanted to download the guide, the QR code will be available later on the presentation too, so we can sort of crack on for those that may have missed it.
And thank you all for comments in the chat. We can stop and discuss things if anybody wants to put their hand up to have a conversation. So boundaries we can think of as, you know, something that can get in the way of leading well and performing well. And there's some great key takeaway points here on this slide, reminding us all that as leaders, and even for ourselves, we need to set clear expectations, that there's this relationship between production and health, which I would suggest for us needs a frame. Sorry, I haven't been well. Needs a frame to say that it's not really a choice, that in fact, a focus on safety enables excellence. So if we could just go to the next slide to make a point.
So Liz, just put your hand up if you want me to.
Yeah, no, sorry, guys. If we just go to the next slide, what we see is an image that will explain to us, it's sort of for us to keep into our minds and our hearts. Is it, yeah, making the point that excellence in most fields requires a balance, yeah? And that in safety it's particularly important. And imagining that in our leadership and for our people, we're looking for them to balance performance and recovery. So we need to use these sort of skills I've seen in the chat where people are being mindful and reflecting on what that is for people. The foundation of performance is this sort of balance, and there's been a really great study in legal firms. We know they're renowned for being, you know, hardworking and pushing in this really transactional directive style. And there was a comparison by Dollard and a group who've written about the safety climate, and they compared the sort of legal firm that actually focuses on a balanced approach to performance versus a legal firm that was more traditional. And they found some pretty extraordinary numbers. Now, they're numbers that are numbers, positive numbers, but we know this in our heart from our own stories. And I would love it if you could put in the chat a story for you. The numbers were like a 28% increase in innovation, a 22% increase in quality, and I think it was a 31% decrease in turnover. My example to offer you is a group that I've been working with for 5 years. And I'll tell you a story and ask if you could maybe reflect on one of your own. But this is a group of elite ocean racers that I train in mindfulness skills, essentially the capabilities in our matrix. And there was a year where they won in 2019 in their category, and a year where they survived when they may not have. And the key point in this is that there was this massive storm, and the skipper at the time, through the training of mind skills for boundaries, knew exactly how long he could focus on a task at hand before he had to stop. And he did exactly that in the gale. And it was that 20 minutes that meant that they won, right? And we compare that to a tragic story 10 years before, when someone was pushing themselves to start the Hobart, coming straight from work, rushing, and actually he didn't come back. So we compare this ability to perform and to survive based on ensuring that we're very clear around our boundaries. So we're asking you to share now something that is an absolute gift to everybody, is some examples of how you set boundaries to manage your own health at work and for others, because we will all learn. We all need as much information and encouragement and inspiration around this point as we can get it.
I was going to say, this is one area where I will hand on heart and forever put my hand up to say that I'm absolutely hopeless at setting boundaries at work. Especially, I find it especially hard when you work remotely and notifications are on 24/7. Like and I'm the kind of person that will just reply to it then and there if I can. So it's hard to sort of set boundaries. So I'm very eager to hear what everybody else has to say.
I'd also think maybe Mark, maybe you could respond to this chat comment about, can you expand on clear expectations, roles, behaviour, outcomes and self-care? I think that we may have a little bit of data about that might come up. Is that right? Am I right?
Yeah, look, I think we do have some data in a second, so happy to sort of talk through some of those points in a second as well.
Oh, Josie, let's get you better at setting boundaries. So essentially what we need to do is reflect. We need to give ourselves some time to reflect. And the problem with it is often when we have multiple goals, and again, this comes back to the value of coaching, because often when we have multiple goals and we haven't set the goals in the right order, which means we start with a big fuzzy vision, then we create goals that are in line with our values, what happens is we create conflicting goals. So unless we've unpacked this conflicting goal situation, what happens is we get terrible at setting boundaries because we aren't really clear on what we can and can't do and what the hierarchy of the goals are. So again, it's an encouragement to teach ourselves or to get some education on coaching and to use that to support your team to do the same.
Brilliant. Christina, was there anything else in the chat that you wanted to share?
Susie has mentioned boundaries come with specific expectations with your role description, and for herself, managing her health is exercise, training, physical activity. And as soon as I read that, I was like, oh, that's what I do as well. Like, I'll make sure that as soon as my husband comes home, I'll go for a walk for at least 30 to 45 minutes just to clear my head, have my own little time. And that sets a boundary with work. It sets a boundary with home life as well. And so, yeah, that's a really good example. Leanne, sorry if I mispronounced that, says can be challenging depending on the situation. Said managing after hours work requests, emails, Microsoft Teams, exercising before work every day, and saying no to additional tasks or projects that you cannot realistically take on without compromising their health or existing commitments is a boundary that Joven has set for themselves. Make self-care a priority. Another boundary Roxanne has said, and a few people that I work with actually have this as well. One of her boundaries is not having Teams, Microsoft Teams on her phone, which I think is a really good one.
Nice. Okay. Well, look, I'll move on, and as it's sort of indicated, just share a little bit more data around the psychosocial DX, particularly around this topic. So one of the questions in the climate survey is, I have the flexibility needed to manage work demands and work-life balance. The the three most highly correlated questions to that are, I have the flexibility needed to do my work. I have the flexibility needed on my work location. So this concept of being able to have some sort of autonomy on where you work. I have difficulty finding time for my own health, and due to work demands. So getting the balance between the job demands and job resources, in particular time, is a big consideration. And lastly, which I think really ties into our discussion today around having really effective leaders, is I can talk to my supervisor about issues that are impacting me. So there's a positive correlation between people feeling like they have the flexibility to do their work and their ability to connect with their supervisor. So really important, I think, in terms of showing there's a clear link between psychological safety, psychosocial health in the workplace, and the role a leader plays. So a couple of take-home messages there. Provide people with the relevant flexibility. Evaluate your job design and the organisation's job design to support personal health, and coach your leaders to actively listen and support their teams.
Thanks, Mark. And I'll just link that back to the original theoretical frames that we started with. We can see how these link to this theory of motivation, which says what we need to do well is we need to feel connected. We need to have a sense of autonomy. We need to be allowed to feel competent, notice what's going well. This is where we see the translation of theory in practice, and now these assessments are giving feedback. It's extremely helpful. So we know that psychological safety is foundational to performance at the level of an individual, a team, and an organisation. And that a big part of that is that we don't function well in a state of fear, and we can have a discussion around the paradox, and maybe we need a little bit of anxiety to perform at our best. But the reality is, when we've got a fear response going on, we focus on the problem, not solution. We have all sorts of behaviours that are not supportive. So what we want to do is create job support and security. People need purpose, the sense of meaning we discussed in the early stages, job control, autonomy, and they need empowerment. So what we see here is people have individual needs. So our point on the next slide really asks you if you could provide examples of how your organisation helps people feel comfortable. And while we're getting that in the chat, I just want to know if we could put up the next slide and ask you to reflect on this idea of tools before rules. So we're back to this idea of coaching, because the implementation activity required to develop a psychologically safe work environment and culture involves an assessment, a clear focus on the reality of what is going on in the culture, but also for the individual. Then the development of an intervention, and the intervention will be as bespoke as the individual. And whilst we can have categories of intervention, we can have the sort of things I think we've seen in the chat, the development of leadership skills, the creation of flexible work environments. Everybody's different. Someone might want to go home to pick up their kid from school, but someone else might need something completely different. So the idea here is to have a suite of assessments that fit, a suite of interventions that can be used, and then to have a reflective process where we're looking at what's happening. We're noticing whether people are becoming more engaged at work. We're noticing whether or not they've stopped engaging at work. Now, people feel heard and connected when there's an individual sort of process as opposed to a rule. So the idea is to have a big toolbox, a master toolbox, and use tools before rules. Do the next slide.
So before we do that, Liz, I might just ask Christina, because I can't see the chat. Have you got
there are no.
Oh, there is now.
Yep, we've got freedom to act, which is part of Carl's company value, partly meaning all employees are able to speak freely, with respect, obviously, without fear of reprisal. This is constantly discussed and practiced at all levels, which is really refreshing. Susie, on the other hand, has said, unfortunately, in her workplace, it is more about direct supervisor/manager than general rules or assistance.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps we could also invite conversation around what is not working. Like, so you could share with us some things that you feel organisations need to address. It's quite compelling that it's not so easy to answer the question of how your organisation makes people feel comfortable.
Travis has just mentioned make continual performance reviews positive around gaining tools for development of individual skills. Pauline has said they say it a lot, but in application, it is often lip service.
So overarching to this is there's ways organisations and ways leaders make workers feel comfortable, and the opposite is also true. So if we go back to the idea originally we came into, we want to notice these things. We want to really pay attention to these types of issues in the workplace and be aware of what's going on to address them. So there's a lot of fear in our workplaces that we hope to share solutions for.
I'm mindful of time, so we want to go to our next slide, perhaps.
Yeah.
Thanks, Christina. So I guess just to reinforce some of the conversations we've had already by some of the psychosocial data, the top 3 correlated questions related to my supervisor focuses on workable solutions rather than blame. I have the right job freedom, so this sense of autonomy. I have flexibility on my work location, and I have realistic time pressures. So all these things around making people feel psychologically safe adds to the, I guess, perception from the workforce that things are fair and people are held accountable in a reasonable way. So a couple of take-home messages there. Coach leaders to give reasonable levels of autonomy, flexibility, and evaluate the job design to minimise undue or unrealistic time pressures. And just lastly, a little bit more information around contributing factors to trusted leaders. The top 3 correlated responses related to I can talk to my supervisor about issues impacting me. My supervisor is willing to listen to work-related problems. I have flexibility, and my supervisor provides me with clear and constructive feedback. So this concept of having someone who can actively listen, coach, and support supports this concept of psychologically safe work environments and positive psychosocial workplaces. So a couple of take-home messages there. Coach leaders to actively listen, provide that flexibility, and coach leaders to give constructive feedback. So that's a really quick summary, a bit of a tie into, I guess, what industry is saying around some benchmark data to complement the work that Liz has spoken about already. So Liz, would you like to provide a few takeaways, or did you want me to jump into this one?
I just also wanted to just link in with Carl's comment in the chat, which is around the importance of understanding bias. And this brings us back to some key takeaways, I think, from the 3 sections. So, we understand bias when we step back and take time to reflect. And we notice in the moment when we get that sense of someone is different, like if we notice a sense that someone is different from us, and we can notice that we're feeling a bias, then it's brilliant, because it's the major step forward. Many people don't have that. And yes, I agree with you. We do have, there is an important gap here for understanding and explaining to people the role of bias and the role of identity in our leadership, in ourself. I think, Mark, if we go back over where we've come, there's some ways to think. I mean, in a 1 hour webinar, we want to give you as much as we can. And I think sometimes the real progress comes from changing some of the ways we think. So we've got a lens. We've got this lens of knowing what the psychological principles are for people to flourish. And we've got the lens of the bloom, you know, so we can take that into our daily life. We understand that when we're leading, what we want to do is combine these ideas of inspiring people and motivating people through transactional, inclusive and empowering leadership towards ourselves and others. Then we want to make sure that people have boundaries and we have boundaries. So we want to take the time to check in on our goals, make sure they're not conflicting, and step back to reflect on the way we're behaving, making sure that they're behaving in line with our objectives. And finally, to ensure that there is the most psychologically safe environment for each of our people and ourselves who want to work out, take the time to assess what's going on, to choose the right tool and to monitor, which I think leads into your takeaways.
Yeah, look, I think you summarised that really well, Liz. And I think it's probably worth summarising where we've been across the 3 webinar series as well. So for those that may have missed it, there are some resources that were made available in webinar 1 and webinar 2. And again, some of those coaching tips too that Liz, you provided, the full download is available there too for those people that might be interested. So Christina, as a bit of a wrap up, there's been 3 webinar series. I appreciate that I was only supposed to tag along on one and I ended up being thrown in the deep end, and here I am for the 3rd time. It's been a really enjoyable experience working with you, Christina, and I mean, the response we've had has been overwhelming. So I'm not sure how that compares for your experience, Christina, but certainly the level of involvement and interest that we've seen has been really positive.
That's amazing to hear. We definitely have had quite a outstanding result from these 3 sessions, and I cannot thank FEFO Consulting enough, as well as I Am Here and Dr. Liz too. So thank you so much, guys. And again, thank you so much to everybody who has joined us. I know there have been some insane key things that we can all take on board to make our lives and our workplaces that little bit more beneficial around this whole topic. I've got a link to absolutely everything that we have discussed over the 3 sessions, as well as all of the questions that have gone unanswered throughout. So what I'm doing is compiling a list of those, and I will also send them through to the presenters as well, so we can get some answers out to you all individually if they haven't come through in each session. I will be sending out that email tomorrow. So once we have finished recording, I will update all of our links, all of the resources and everything that anybody has asked. I'll also provide contact information for everybody who has presented as well. So I just want to, again, thank you all so much for listening, for taking the time out of your workplace, for going through and taking this all on board. Liz, I know you've got something to say, so I'll throw over to you. But again, yeah, thank you so much, everybody.
Oh yeah, double click on that. Just before we because we have got a few minutes, just before, I just didn't know if you were wrapping up, because we are staying on for questions and answers if you want. But I want to just throw to Mark or to open, and also love everybody's feedback, a question that's been put in by the O'Hara brothers, which this just might not be a popular question, and I'm drawing our attention to this one to say thank you for asking what you think would be a non-popular question, demonstrating the sort of vulnerability that we're encouraging all leaders to do. And also just to address is how much of the work time is expected to be spent on these initiatives, working styles, etc. So I guess, I mean, if you're happy to speak, that would be great, but if not, in the chat. Behind your question, is a question around how much work time should be spent on leadership training? And if behind that it is like the sense that it takes people out of work, I can only say that the productivity and effectiveness that comes out of people who do coaching training in particular is quite well recognised as a 4-fold increase in often outcomes. So the question sort of I'm wondering whether the question is coming from above. Is it hard for people to get away from work? Of course, many of us deal with that. Or is the question coming from a sort of return on investment of time perspective?
Unfortunately, they don't have a microphone, but if you want to pop the answer in the chat, that might be beneficial to
maybe Mark. Yeah, do you have a comment on this sort of inquiry, Mark?
Liz, I can't see the chat, so do you mind just repeating the question?
So their question was, let me go back.
How much of work time is expected to be spent on these initiatives / working style? So
as a percentage almost, yeah.
I mean, it's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to give it a blanket answer, but what I would say, if a leadership competency framework is applied effectively, a large component of that should be on the job learning as well. So in effect, if you can integrate ongoing leadership development and improvement as part of your everyday work, it almost becomes integrated and you don't need to slice out more time in your day. It just becomes a part of the way you go to work and learn every day. Often, that's challenging, and the groundwork needs to be put in place to begin with, but that's the ideal state.
Yeah, it also leads to one of the powers of a lens, the powers of a frame to look through, such as the frame of, seeing each other as the same, which reduces our bias, and practicing it. That doesn't need time out of work, but it does need a lens. This lens that what we're doing as leaders is deliberately creating autonomy and mastery and relatedness in our environments doesn't need time out of work, but it does need a little bit of time to learn the lens. Yeah.
Wonderful. As I mentioned to the team at the O'Hara brothers who have been asking these questions, I've noticed over the last 3 sessions, they've asked a few questions around neurodivergence and some other things like that. So what I will do is I'll email you guys a list of everybody's questions in case they have gone unanswered. And if you want to get in contact with these people individually, that's amazing. Liz, Mark, do you have anything else before we wrap up today?
I just have a comment to thank everyone who's come here. I do think you're heroes. The work world needs some solutions to this rising issue in mental well-being and productivity. And I know people are like the O'Hara brothers are very busy doing all sorts of development. This sort of deep development can be seen as, not as important, but it is deeply, pervasively impactful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much to absolutely everybody that has joined us, not only today, but across the 3 sessions. Like I said, I'll be emailing everybody after today and give you a link to absolutely everything we've discussed. So have a wonderful rest of the week, everyone. Mark, thank you. Liz, thank you. And we hope to see you on some more webinars from myosh. Have a great day, everyone.
We're here for a little bit longer if people want to ask questions or through the chat. And I've just put a question in if they want to say what they're going to do as a result of today.
Amazing. Thanks so much, guys.